Welcome back to Round's Rant, and today I am joined by Nick Delehanty. Nick studied law. He's also a business owner, but probably most importantly, has recently elected to run as an independent for Dublin Bay South. So, Nick's first and foremost, thanks a million for coming on the show. I know it's a busy week for you, but how is all?
Yeah, I'm delighted to be on the show. It's been a very busy week trying to get on as many things as possible at the moment, to be honest, and trying to get my name out there as much as possible because that's what it's about. Just name recognition at this stage, and trying to alert to people that I'm here. I'm a very serious candidate, and I've put in a lot of work throughout the year.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I suppose before we get into the nitty gritty of policies, what impact you'd love to have, etc., etc. Uh, One question that has to be asked is like a quick glance at your LinkedIn or your past. Like you're a business owner yourself, but you had a job in Arthur Cox as well. But like, why or what does it take for one to leave their job in Arthur Cox to start a journey of becoming a politician one day?
Yeah, well, pretty good question. Um, you know, I I suppose I really enjoyed my career in law. I was there for about 10 years, and all the training I got and the experience I got stands to me completely. And I only ever talk fondly about my experiences there. It was brilliant. But some of the work, you do in these big law firms or accountancy firms touches on some of the most controversial aspects of what Ireland is about at the moment. And, Ireland is a tax haven. I'm okay with that. But we also, invite these very aggressive structures, tax aggressive structures into Ireland, who domicile here, and then we allow them to invest in Irish assets. And so what I'm talking about there are vulture funds or cuckoo funds who, everybody knows. So that was my job. I was setting those up, and I was setting up all sorts of other funds and structures as well. But a lot of my time was setting up these. And at the time in 2018, it was very controversial. It was front page news for a whole summer about what these cuckoo funds were doing, and I didn't really fundamentally agree that this was the right policy for Ireland. Now, it was a great policy for the law firms and for anyone, getting paid to do the
Yeah,
work. Like,
exactly.
nothing wrong there. But, when you wear your green jersey and put your green hat on, you're like, I don't really think this is the right thing for Ireland. And so with that just little notch kind of in the back of my head, I realized it was during kind of took lockdown and COVID to realize that, okay, I don't want to keep doing this. I would like to enter public life. If I want to enter public life, I probably can't keep my job in Arthur Cox or wherever, because if you're going to, be loud and give out about RTE, for instance, RTE is their one of their biggest clients.
Yeah.
So I made the decision. Look, I want to be financially independent. So I went and set up a doggy daycare business, which totally different to law, but huge experience again. Managing staff, managing vehicles on the road, managing clients, setting the whole thing up. It's a great little business, but a whole new skill set. So it's good to just challenge yourself and start fresh.
Yeah, you've got a different few angles there you can draw on from an experience point of view. As you said, a lot of the stuff you may have been doing previously in work relates to, as you were saying there, the vulture funds. Then being a business owner, you probably know the pros and cons to being one currently right now in this country, and stepping into the political minefield, if you will. One thing I'd like to ask is, and I know it's in its infancy, but I'm not sitting talking to you today and seeing a 75-year-old man. You're in your 30s. You're relatively young from a political point of view. But what do you think, or what have you found to be I suppose, the biggest challenge facing young aspiring politicians in Ireland today?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a few different paths you can go down if you want to get into politics, right? You can first of all decide to join a party, and then you must decide which party you want to join. But let's say you join one of the biggest parties, Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. There's, you know, once you join them, you're joining a very rigid structure. So you might go in and say, I want to change the world and I want this, that, and the other. But once you get in there, you're told, like, shut up, join the back of the queue. This is a very large national structure that's been around for 100 years. If you think, politics is bad, what about inner party politics? That's even worse. So I did not want to go down that road. But if someone is diligent enough and they join a party and you wait around for long enough, like what I say is in freshers week of college, people sign up to Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael Ogra or whatever it is. And if you hang around for 15 years, you can become Taoiseach. And that's happened twice in a row now. Like Simon Harris just joined it in college, then dropped out of college, waited for 15 years, hung around, now he's Taoiseach, and Leo Varadkar did the same. So, like, there hasn't been much change. Like, there's no dynamism in the party structures at the moment. So I've taken a different route. I'm going independent, which is way harder. Like, because first of all, there is no brand. You have to create your own brand, differentiate yourself from everyone else, and then compete with the big boys. So, if they're Man United and I'm Wrexham, but without Ryan Gosling, and I'm just mono Wrexham. And that's kind of where I'm playing. But the trade-off is that I can be extremely vocal, opinionated, and just say what I want and what I believe. But then the chances of getting voted in or getting into power are obviously way less. But I choose the freedom of expression and freedom of individual thought ahead of, being a party politician.
Yeah, here to that. And I suppose it's somewhat of a loaded question, but I think it's important before you make some of your opinions known about the state of Ireland and what you change or what you may agree with. But like right now, as a guy who's putting his name in the hat, like, are you excited or worried about the short to medium term of this country at the moment?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the outcome of this election. If the next government is made up of left leaning, like say left leaning parties of Labour and Social Democrats or the Greens, and we continue with similar policies that we have had for the last 5 years, yeah, I'm actually pretty worried. Definitely worried. The current trajectory of of the way we're going, if we keep going at that rate of change, it's unsustainable. Like at some point, these other parties are going to have a come to Jesus moment and realize just reality.
Yeah, true. Well, I think the overriding, not to draw comparisons to the US, but like it seems like a lot of people, whether they're, I know some very wealthy families, I also know some families who are like struggling to survive on their current situations. It's just an element of frustration, and I think the T word of trust is somewhat broken in certain areas. I'm not saying for everyone, far from it, but like as you look at Ireland right now, again, you can't really fix one thing without talking about another and vice versa. But if you were in power, could enforce a specific policy with no objections, no issues, and I know in politics that's the Hollywood dream, so to speak. But like, what do you think is the most important thing we should be trying to fix? And like, also with that, how are we going to fix it? Or in your opinion, how would we go about fixing it?
Yeah, so like the number one issue in Ireland at the moment is housing, right? If everyone had a house, everyone would be pretty happy. And but one of the biggest contributors to the biggest problem is immigration, right?
Yeah.
And in the paper at the moment, or in the mainstream news, comparing saying that immigration contributes to the housing issues will get you branded as far right, even though it's simple like mats. Like
Yeah.
if you bring in more people, there's not enough places. Like it contributes. But they debated this in the Dáil for about 2 or 3 days. It was like ridiculous that they just get caught up in this. So the question is, what would you do? You got to. They need to treat housing like an emergency, and really, I have a slogan: "Build, baby, build." And they're not doing that. But what they are treating as an emergency is immigration. So what they've done in the last 2 or 3 years is they've changed planning laws to allow any building in the country, basically any building with a roof, can be now converted into an asylum center, an emergency accommodation, without the usual planning requirements. Okay,
Mm.
and you're like, okay, look, okay, you want to go down that road? Well, what about passing emergency laws to let anyone build a house on the land they own for the next 4 years? And people might say that's wild, but like for 4 years, that would just suck some air out of the housing crisis. Or what about passing a law where you no longer need planning permission, or planning, even with planning permission, you'll be allowed put a shomra or a granny shed in your back garden. At the moment, they're not allowed. You're allowed to put an office, but not a livable showma. And or why not reintroduce uh, bed sits? In 2009, the Green Party banned bed sits because they said nobody should have to live in a bed sit. But that was like a very pompous thing. Oh, we don't believe somebody should live in a bedsit. But like, if I'm 21 years old, like, and I'm a young fella, I'd love to live in a bedsit.
Yeah.
They've taken the bottom rung off the ladder. A bedsit is still an asset. You could buy one, live in it for 5 years and then sell it, and you're still only 26. Like that's brilliant. But they took that away, and so my point is, like, there is not the right urgency within this government to solve housing, but there is a real urgency to solve the world's problems of anyone who wants to apply here will be housed in and accommodated as freely as possible, and this is costing the state a fortune. Of course, we want to help people, like,
Yeah.
obviously, but you got like it's very hard. The only way we can pay for helping these people is that we have a very functioning economy here in the first place, that we all pay taxes into. But like, why am I paying taxes, or why is anyone paying taxes into a system that they're not getting enough back from? Like, people will lose faith in that system. And if you look at stats at the moment, young people are like, oh, why should I go to work? I'm not going to get much from it. I'm not going to be able to buy a house. There's not a whole lot of motivation there for a lot of younger people. So to answer your question, housing and immigration, the number one and two issues, and you treat housing like an emergency and stop treating immigration like an emergency.
And listen, I think most people listening to this, well, actually, the vast majority would agree with, like, no one, everyone agrees that people are welcome here if they're immigrating from situations that may be worse, like just terrible. Like, say, for instance, Ukraine, we've taken so many in, or even people who just simply want to come and contribute to Ireland. Like, I've worked in countless tech companies, and some of the
Yeah,
best colleagues I've had have been, people from different countries. But the point I want to make is, when I look at, say, housing, which I think is really top of the list for most people, along with the cost of living, what your take would probably be more important than mine, is that a lot of people, when I say, oh, well, like, I'm working 3 or 4 jobs currently, and like, I don't have a sniff of getting near buying a home unless I get a huge loan out. And the point I'm making is, people go, oh, well, there was we came out of the boom, then there was COVID, and then inflation and all this jazz. And it's kind of like, well, I look at then the EU that we're a part of. So why has the rent gone up on average in EU states by 13%, and in Ireland it's up 60%? Or that was even like 6 months ago. It could have even gone up further. So, like, where have we gone so far wrong compared to other countries? Because I know you've spoken about Northern European states and how they've conducted things. Like, is it that much of a mismanagement by our government compared to other EU countries? or is it just simply no matter who was in charge, they were ultimately going to fail because of the nature of what Ireland is kind of in now?
No, I don't think we were ultimately going to fail. No, definitely policies. But just to touch back, just to make it clear, immigration is an umbrella term. And there are two types. There are people that come and immigrate to work, and that's largely fine. There are other people that like to criticize that cohort of people. I'm not one of those too much. I'm talking about the people coming here for to welfare, the people that come here
Mm.
and don't work, and there's the difference, and very very important to distinguish between those. And you're saying that they're coming from war torn countries, but if you look at the top three nationalities of where they're from are Nigeria, Algeria, and Georgia. Georgia and Algeria are designated safe countries officially in by the Irish government, and Nigeria, the ambassador to Nigeria last week's front of the Sunday Independent was like Nigeria should be a safe country. So there we go. Top three countries, pretty safe. Not a whole lot of wars going on, but yet here they are benefiting, getting enormous amounts of soaking up enormous amounts of resources and money from the Irish state. So I'm like these people are not are taking what we are should be giving to actual people fleeing wars. Do you get me? Like
Yeah.
people that need this the most aren't probably getting it. So unless for any system to work, you need strict rules, so it's not getting abused. But going back to the other question, like why are rents so high? What is Ireland doing wrong? Well, we have a government that likes to intervene a lot. So I'm in a rented apartment here at the moment. I've lived in this apartment for 6 or 8 years, and it's capped. The rent is capped. It can only go up, a certain amount every year or two. And even though I benefit from that, like I'm happy that my rent is capped, you have to take the intellectual argument and go, well, that's actually a bad thing for the city as a whole or the country as a whole. Because if you have rent caps and you're a developer of apartments, you're not going to develop and invest into a city or a country that has rent caps because you're like, well, if I build, 100 million euro worth of apartments in Dublin, I'm just capped at what I can charge for them. But if I go to another city, Manchester or wherever, there's no rent cap. And so that means more apartments get built in Manchester, which means the supply is higher and the prices naturally come down. And you just let the market take effect. Now, that's a very hard argument to sell to somebody who's in, a rented apartment and who's benefiting from a rent cap, but at the same time is unable to buy a house or an apartment. But you got to zoom out. So the policy here, you have to slowly unwind these rent freezes and stuff. And I'm not saying this is easy, but you should unwind it at the rate of new houses or apartments are being built. So you say to industry, look, we're going to get rid of these rent freezes over the next 5 or 10 years on the condition that you build enough or whatever. And that's pretty simplistic, but the point is the government has done things within the building, within construction industry to prevent supply and the supply of housing in Ireland. I've very often equated to De Beers and the diamonds.
Yeah.
They say diamonds are the biggest scam in the world because there's so many of them, and they're just they manage the supply. I think that's the case with Irish housing. There's a couple of companies making a fortune, and the less houses they build, the higher price they can sell the new ones at.
Yeah. And to take a step or two back on the immigration side of things, because I think with like the housing, again, like we could be here for 40 years debating the ins and outs of that. But on immigration now, like that's hugely topical and we've discussed it already. But like I read something different every 2 days, whether it's I'm picking up the Irish Times or even in the UK, they've done pieces on ourselves, especially like a year on from the Dublin riots. They It tends to read differently every time I read it, in the sense that it seems like different policies are being enforced around immigration, and like right now, like what is being done to, I suppose, qualify these people, what has been done to manage the entire situation, because like you've even pointed out about the fact that like if you walk down into town, and I do that on a weekly basis going into work, you still see the leftovers of the fencing all around the canal, which you were saying it's like 30 grand a week to sort that out. And then you still see tents all over the city. But like what actually is being done right now that is somewhat effective or maybe not effective to help this situation, because it seems worse than ever from a bystander.
Yeah. So, first of all, too many people are coming here to apply for asylum, right? Now, technically speaking, every single person in the world has a right to apply for asylum if they're fleeing a country. You can just go to any country. We could go to America and apply for asylum. Okay, so that's from the Geneva Conventions that were drafted in the 1950s. And my point is these laws are completely out of date. They were drafted in a time before private equity, before low cost airlines, before mobile phones, and there are no protections in these to stop the financialization of the asylum process. Like what's happened is this whole movement of people has turned into a very lucrative business for certain very big players. So there's been a huge influx of people applying for asylum in Ireland. In 2019, it was like 3 or 4 thousand, and now it's up to like 26,000. So there's been a sea change. But why are they coming to Ireland? The question must be asked: like, why is like Ireland is the furthest place away? You know, we're an island off Europe. These people are coming from so far away, literally the first place in the map. But we have just such a generous asylum process. Like we are known as Treasure Island. And what has happened is other countries had very generous processes as well. Denmark, Sweden, Germany, but they've all closed up shop. They're like, since 2015, some of those countries took in way too many people. Different parties got into power. They were like, we can't do this. We need to protect our welfare state, and they shut it down. And my thing is like, okay, this has happened across Europe. Why can't we learn from Denmark, from Holland, from Finland, from Sweden? Like, surely that's the play. But our government is like, no, we must do our bit and keep doing our bit. And it's like, no, like just make a decision. It's a difficult decision. You can't help everyone. It's okay to say that. Like you cannot. But so in other countries they make it harder. If you arrive there to seek asylum, they will, in order to you'll have to pass an exam, you learn a language, or they might make you pay for your stay, take any possessions you have on you to make you pay. And they're controversial things. We don't do any of that. But it's also important to know that 350 million people could come to Ireland tomorrow morning legally, and that's called the European Union. And 60 million more people could come, and that's called the UK. So we like this thing of like close the border, like that's a load of nonsense. Like we have an extremely porous border, and an awful lot of people are coming through Belfast and driving down and seeking. They're coming from the UK, or the government's own statistics on this are you're right in what you're saying, that they change week to week, so you don't know what to believe. But they did say 80% of people applying are coming through Northern Ireland. And it's very hard to track where these people have come from because they've all come through England. But eventually they want to go through the Irish system, because the Irish system, after 4 months, we allow anyone here to work. So within 4 months, you get a working visa. Oh, not a full-time working visa, but a temporary one. But then the application takes about 2 or 3 years to process. So while you're just waiting, you're working, and in some place, you're living without paying any rent. So you're in a hotel, You might be in a tented accommodation. I'm not saying the accommodation is great. Some of it's better than others. But women and children get put up generally in hotels, and they get free food, free accommodation, and the ability to work, and sometimes even childcare as well. And then when you get processed, then there's a system that will eventually give you a house or an apartment. And like, this is all really generous.
Mm.
Like, and like, that's a great, like, it's great to be Irish at Cade Meal Fáilte, million welcomes. That is brilliant when the numbers applying are 2,000 people or 3,000, because you're like, look, we're doing our best. But when we do not have the resources to provide all this to an unlimited amount of people. And when you read the manifestos of some of these parties, they say there is no limit. No, we are all global citizens. I'm like, no, that's crazy. That is just crazy. So that's the current state of play of why people are coming.
And like, I think a very important thing that I'm obnoxiously passionate about, and I'm not a guru when it comes to the political landscape, as my family will love to stand by, which I actually would agree with. I wouldn't know some of them, but what I would say is I have a very good eye of what leadership looks like, whether that's through my own experience, whether it's meeting whether it's through this podcast. I've had some people who've been CEOs or hugely influential people politically or in the United States in organizations, or even I've seen some of the best sports coaches up close and personal. But like, as you said there's a lot of difficult conversations that need to be had. There's a lot of very tough decisions that are going to affect ultimately millions of people. But as you were saying there, I think it's mainly like it's the exact same issue that the US were going through the last year. It's like, can we look after ourselves and then start to really, lend that rope to maybe people who are taken away from the struggles of the Irish people. And I think that's a generic concept across the whole world currently that a lot of countries are facing. But back to my point is, I think you need real leadership for that. And I think at the moment, and again, you can disagree or agree, and like, this is why I think he's dropped in the polls, is that Simon Harris, he does not strike me as a leader. He strikes me as a guy who's head of a political party who can talk, he can dress nice, he can converse with people, but he does not seem to me, and I think a huge issue of what's caused Ireland to get to the point where it is now is a lack of leadership. I think we've had many great people involved in politics. Like, I wouldn't have really a bad thing to say about Simon or Leo or whoever came before them. They've all been great people. But as actual leaders of this country, leading the men and women who have to make the tough decisions with them, leading, more importantly, the Irish nation back to where it needs to be, I don't think we have that. And I suppose, as you alluded to at the start, like how people get into politics, like, is it a way, like, is it something that needs to be addressed, or is it something that maybe as Irish people, the terminology of like, I'll be grand, sure, look, we love using these terms where it's like, let's not deal with that now. Is that just in our DNA to be a bit passive in these areas? But I think we're at a point now where, like, we need a leader to make some pretty ruthless decisions. And as you were even saying, it's not about being left, it's not about being right, it's about doing what's right for Ireland, which can seem a little bit divisive depending on the topic that you're dealing with, whether it's housing, whether it's immigration, whether it's about healthcare or whatever it may be. So, like, do you think we have a leadership issue? I know I've gone on a bit of a rant there, but
Yeah, no, you're dead right. And something I actually talk about an awful lot is leadership. And we definitely have a political crisis at the moment, because the concept of a rotating Taoiseach, that, since Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have got into bed with each other, like, we are normalizing this concept. And that is like the biggest example of a lack of leadership. We're taking a 5-year government term and truncating it into two-year terms, and so there is no leader. It's like, well, I'm going to make the decisions for the first 2 years. I'm going to try and avoid all the big decisions and leave them to you at the end. And then, sure, we'll manage the current situation, and nobody will get kicked out of government. We're not going to do much either, but we'll just manage it and we'll all be in government. Like, that's crap. Like, we don't have our best and brightest in politics at the moment. Like, if you go back 100 years, Michael Collins, De Valera, all these people, Griffith, Connolly, all, like, go through the list. They were very young. Like, a lot of them were in their 20s and 30s, and they were really smart people. If you read their letters to each other, some of them were brilliant economic minds and things like that. And that's what we sent. Politics was a place for our best people to go to, but now our best people go into private equity or tech roles or accountancy or whatever else, because they'll earn a lot more money. Like, why would somebody, like, in the firms I used to work in, some of the smartest people I've ever met, are partners in these firms. And there's one or two in particular people. And I remember sitting across from them and go, man, you should be leading the country here.
Yeah.
Or maybe not leading it, but you should be like in charge of all the work here, because you were brilliant at doing, you're just so smart. You mightn't have the charisma, but just, this person would rather, work on the other side of the fence for the big private equity companies and earn £1 million a year. And I'm like, well, that's ultimately wrong. It's going to be to the detriment of Ireland. And it's like, okay, well, how do we fix this? Like, so we've spotted the problem. We lack leadership. We lack good politicians. And my best thinking around this is we need to incentivize people mid-career, like in their late 20s, early 30s, 40s, or even 50s into politics, not in their early 20s. So how do you do that? I would like to see a scheme whereby if you work for 10 years and you contribute to PAYE, and then you decide to get into public life, whether it's a politician or in a public role, for the next 10 years, you then get a tax rebate of X amount of percent from your PAYE contributions. So it's a real carrot for anyone with 10 years of private, experience to go into public service. Now, you can dig into all that, and we could come around, but the general idea is there of, we need people mid-career to bring private experience into public roles.
Yeah. Like, it's something as basic as, like, that's what happens. That's why, say, the rugby players in this country stay here, is because they get tax
it's very
incentives.
similar to
Yeah,
that.
very similar idea. And, like, it's funny that you mention people are going off working for tech companies. Like, initially I wanted to be a teacher when I was coming out of college, 23, 24. And then I soon realized what I'd be taking home after I do my HDIP would be, on average, what the average cost of rent would be in this country. So I was like, financially, it's just not viable unless I took on 2 more jobs outside of it, which some of the people I worked with had to do to, get families fed and whatnot. But with the role of leadership being obviously quite significant, I do think there's been a huge sea of change, and I think it'd be naive not to mention, say, what's just transpired in America, the role someone like Elon Musk has just had in the election, and some of the most influential podcasters where you've got 40, 50 million people listening to one episode, and the battle of media, so to speak, against print and online. But you are, and I think rightfully so, quite active on social media with some of your opinions, potential policies. You might call out other politicians or other actions on a weekly basis. But from your perspective, I personally think every political figure should be confident going on podcasts, should be confident, saying the things they believe in on Twitter. Maybe not so much to maybe the Donald Trump playbook, but they should be able to speak freely and not just have the generic responses, all prepped, etc., etc. But from your side of the pond, how important do you think social media is now in not just your role within politics, but in modern day politics, especially getting people in their teens, in their early 20s, early 30s to actually engage in politics?
Yeah, like it's essential, like completely and utterly essential. Everyone is their own media company now. That's the only way you have to think about it. Like I've done a few podcasts in the last week. Not one of them, have been Irish Times or RTE or any of that. Like anyone with enough graft can carve out a massive following. Like you know this better than anyone. Like you've been doing this podcast for how many years?
Nearly 8.
8 years,
Yeah.
and you gain a following, and that's what matters. People, trust you. They know what you're about, and it's personalized to you, and that that's also, it protects you as well. Because let's say I go and do an Irish Times interview or something, and they misquote me and write a bad piece. Well, if I have 15,000 followers on X, I can just go feck these lads,
Yeah.
and I can paint myself in whatever light I like to 15,000 people straight away. So it's incredibly important, but it's also direct access. Like on TikTok, you reach a much younger audience. A lot of times when I walk down the street, I see a bunch of kids, 15 or 16 years old, and they know who I am from TikTok. They obviously can't vote, but they will vote someday. But it's about reaching people and being uh, and just being genuine. Like the modern way of, like, if you look at younger people on TikTok, it's warts and all. Like it's get ready with me. I've no makeup on, and I look shit, and then you put on the makeup. Like they don't care. Or I've just got out of bed. There's ketchup on my top. Like nobody on TikTok
Mm.
gives a shit. That generation do not give a shit about. Whereas we're probably more the Instagram generation of, like, every photo has to be perfect.
Yeah.
They've grown up a lot more in the digital space. So they're like, yeah, I'm looking well in this one. I'm not looking well in that one. I don't really care. That's just my opinion. But why I'm saying that is because, so in order to relate as a human, every politician is a human. You should be just talking openly like this to your audience or to your followers, not in a rehearsed script with a tie on and unable to budge from that. And that's one of the problems with the parties. So if I was running for Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, like, I would probably have to get permission to do this podcast, and I'm not sure if I'd be allowed.
I've had
Like,
two people from Fianna Fáil say no, and
oh, really?
it was their agents or spokespeople. So
Like, there you go. Were they? You don't have to tell me who they are, but they're obviously Dublin anyway.
yeah,
Um, that's shocking. Like, okay, that tells everything. Like, it shows, like, do you not have an opinion in your head? Like, I'm sure they do. They would probably like to do it themselves, maybe, but that just shows you how constrained the whole thing is. Like, working as part of a political team or a political party, the bigger the party is, the more attack vectors you have if someone says
mm.
something wrong, or if you have a policy written down in some document. We have a policy for 10,000 houses, and then Joe Blogs goes on your podcast and says we'll never make 10,000 houses. You're like, oh, why the fuck did you say
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
but you just got to roll with that. Like, you just got to go get it, because at the speed of which you're actually gaining followers and gaining trust, people actually don't really care about the technicalities of stuff. They just they'll get a better vibe. Um, uh, so yeah, that's really interesting, actually, that they couldn't, and it
Yeah,
proves my point, if anything.
yeah. It's always the sticking point. It's when politicians come on or maybe have a history in political, or some of the Americans, they've been high up on maybe journalism, like with Fox News or ESPN or NBC, and they always kind of say, "Oh, well, what are we going to be talking about?" And it's a bit dicey. So it doesn't shock me. It's just the nature of the game. But one of the points you made there about, like, being authentic is, I think, really, really important, in the sense that, like, especially now, it's like a year ago we had O'Connell Street being burnt to the ground, and we have so many issues that need fixing. But, like, even in the last couple of years, I was only thinking, like I was like, oh well, okay, we've got these issues, but like, has there been any like, excuse my maybe jock terminology here, but like blow up? And like a quick Google, and you're suddenly thinking, okay, well during COVID we handled that rather poorly, but then you had like Golfgate, which was utterly hilarious when it happened. You had places like the FAI have that scandal. You had RT with the payment scandal, which ultimately meant Tuberty and the likes had to just vacate the building. Then, as you've pointed out, you had the tracker mortgage scandal. And again, like this comes back to bad decisions being made by people in big leadership positions, and ultimately then it eventually been trying to be kept quiet or kept under the rug, and then
Mm.
eventually after a few months, sometimes years, it comes out because of things like social media where there's very little hiding ground, or there's always a Inspector Cluedo to find out and go, hey, we've caught you here, so you're going to have to own up to the shit show you've put us in. But that kind of gets onto one of my points that I'd like to ask you, and maybe it's too early for you to have a specific example, but I think one of the most impressive things I see any politician do, or CEO, or whoever it may be in a position in power, is incorporating feedback from the people who maybe strongly disagree with you, and how you actually make that, or sorry, like kind of how you incorporate that into your decision making process. So what I mean by that is, obviously you look in the news, Simon Harris has been getting roasted. He's gone down in the polls because how he's interacted with some people. And I'm not even overly criticizing, because he's probably had thousands and thousands and thousands of people come up to him in the last couple of weeks, and he's probably had some of the best interactions, and maybe even some that have been worse than that have been filmed. But my point is, especially as of late, it feels like Ireland is a place where when the leaders or politicians, are maybe someone disagrees with them and gives them a point, or maybe an experience they're having where they feel like they're neglected and not being treated fairly, I would love more politicians to put their hand up and go, we got that one wrong, or by God, that was a terrible decision, or that scandal was an absolute shit show. But very rarely it happens. And I think, as you maybe alluded to, a lot of these places are in bed with each other. So there's that collusion, without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it is simply a fact. Like, do you find, or do you think you would be open to listening to ideas, but also listening to ideas where they go, Nick, I think you're talking a load of crap there, but you should listen to me because this is important, because this is how the people feel. And then in turn, you might have to go, okay, maybe my opinion isn't actually the right one, or maybe I need to dilute it a little bit to, appease the people, because ultimately that's what politics is all about.
Yeah, well, there's a few things in there. One is accountability. There is no accountability at the moment. The fact that not a single head rolled for the bike shed,
Yeah.
you know, is an incredible example of poor leadership. Like I
Mm.
often, a good way to to manage being a leader, test yourself, is like, what would Alex Ferguson do? Like, Fergie would, like, he would have been made an example of that type of stuff. Or like, even the I'm sure you've heard of this guy McGahan up in Louth.
Yes.
I've been calling this out all year. I just think, look, anyone get in a fight and whatever, but I just don't think that person is the right person to put their name forward as for a general election. And I don't think a Taoiseach should be endorsing that kind of candidate. So I think that was really poor leadership from Harris. Not to, if you're a leader, one of the first things you have to do, or even a school teacher, you have to show that you're tough. You have to
Yeah.
show your teeth pretty early. Make an example of the first person that's out of line, and then the rest will respect you. But he didn't do that. But so there is no accountability. But they do trot out this, lessons will be learned. Like, that's now the new meme for anything. Like, lessons will be learned,
It's
and
like,
like lessons are never learned. It's just such a cop out. But again, like, back in the 80s and 90s, things used, scandals used to bring down a government. Like, there was a famous, they tried to put VAT on babies' shoes, and it brought down the government. But uh, nothing brings down the government anymore, and that is because they're just carefully managing the status quo. Like there is no accountability. So something there like definitely has to change. I don't know, you know, what's going to happen to do it. There has to be a seismic shift. Like we cannot keep going on with Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael swapping in and out. Like there has to be one of them has to break away, and or something new has to emerge.
Mm. And I suppose before I finish off with a quick fire question and let you
Yeah.
get back to the promotion over the next few days and Judgment Day on Friday, but like what is all going well achievable for you in the next year or two? Say you
Yeah.
do get
So
elected.
yeah. So if I get elected, like that's huge. Like that would just be it would be one of the biggest shocks of the whole election cycle. But I've put enough effort into it that I've given myself a chance of getting the last seat, an outside chance, but a chance. People that will vote for me would like to vote for me twice. I have a
Yeah.
very core following, but it's like, have I reached enough people? Um, but if I get in, I will be, an incredibly effective opposition TD. Like they don't want me to get in. I'm different to the rest of them. A TD who I like is Michael McNamara, who's now
Mm.
left the Dáil, and I try and model myself from him because he was a very effective opposition TD questioning the government. But ultimately, I want to try and build a following. Join with a group of people. I don't want to be an independent TD for 10 years for the next. That I will have failed. We either form a grouping with other TDs or other people out there, or one of the big parties sees sense and wants to adopt the same way of thinking. Modernize. And if one of the parties wants to modernize, then I'll listen. But I just do not see that happening anytime soon. And there's other groups out there, think tanks and stuff, similar ideas that and viewpoints, and we're all swimming in the same way. So I'm hopefully things will merge.
Yeah. Well, I think society is changing, and I think worldwide that's the case. And I do think the left and right probably agree on a lot more than they probably would like to, but it's just become a bit divisive as of late. But I do believe that collaboration is definitely there, but it may not be right now. But maybe in a couple of years, maybe as you said, maybe something has to be torn down to build back up with a fresh set of ideas. And yeah, I do think it's nearly at that point where you need a change, or say when say Trump first came in, or even now Trump coming back in, it feels like they just were so fed up that they just needed something to reboot and just,
Yeah,
it might work, it might be horrific, but something had to change and needed to change quick and pretty drastically. So I feel like a year ago, that O'Connell Street, the Dublin riots, I think that's one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in my own country. And I feel like that was, I'm not saying that's how all of Ireland feel, far from it, but when you see something that intense and violent and insane at your doorstep, you're like, okay, well, something is brewing here, across the landscape, not just a majority who obviously did reckless stuff that was appalling that night, but as I was saying, it's something that you do take note of, regardless of what your beliefs are. And yeah, no, how I normally finish is just with a few quick fire questions.
yeah,
Nothing too. I won't be trying to trick you out here or get a
yeah.
quick quote for the Irish Times or whatever.
Okay,
So be a bit lighthearted. And yeah, after 8 years, I've never had to edit an answer, so there's absolutely zero pressure.
okay.
But first one's probably a bit tough, but it can be relating to the last few months or any stage of your life. But what mistake have you previously made that taught you the most valuable lesson?
Um,
Quite a deep one to start off
yeah,
with.
just yeah, I mean, a few mistakes. Just prepare. Like what mistake? I should have got a mortgage when I could have when I was a lawyer, and it was a big mistake. I probably should have done that, and I was probably a bit naive in thinking that it would be fine. I had a chance to get a mortgage, and it's just a mistake I made at that time. So when someone says, "What's a mistake for me?" That's it. What lesson have I learned from that? I'm not sure I've learned a lesson from that, because I'll still get one. But I suppose I was a bit overly cautious, because during that time it was bad. I was talking to a lot of people that lived in negative equity, and this concept of negative equity just haunted people. But yet they now have a house, and the house is not negative equity. So anyway, that was a mistake I made.
Okay, still relatable to modern day Dublin and Irish life. So the next one is best coffee spot in Dublin.
Il Valentino, Grand Canal Dock.
Okay, good show. Best film made about politics.
Oh, Vice is very good.
Vice. I'm trying to see if I've seen that.
About Dick Cheney. It's just a brilliant film.
Oh, I haven't seen it, but I know the one you're speaking of.
Yeah, no, very good. Worth a watch.
Your biggest pet peeve.
Virtue signaling.
Okay. The best book you've ever read.
Heroic Leadership. Is a very good book. Andre Agassi's biography is excellent. I actually don't read enough books. I'm trying to think of Shantaram is another very good book I read.
Okay. The best concert you've been to.
LCD Sound System, the Olympia.
Okay, intimate, but I'd say that was
pretty class. Or Kalkbrenner in the Olympia, and the Olympia best venue.
It is. It's class. Underutilized.
Yeah, with your brother on both. I think both.
Yeah, we'll use that to maybe the Patreon subscribers will edit in that story. But second last one is, what is the worst thing to do? Hoover the house, change the bed sheets, or empty the dishwasher.
Change the bed sheets.
Yeah,
it's like a shoulder workout.
It's funny. Every man I've had on this podcast has said the bed sheets, and then for the few females I've had on, they're like, it's the easiest thing ever to do. So there's a clear divide in skill set there that probably needs to be addressed. And I suppose, lastly, Nick, for the people who made it to this stage, who are 52 minutes or whatever it is in, why should they vote for you?
Because I'm a completely different candidate in Dublin Bay South. Simple as that. I'm the only one talking sense and talking openly and honestly. I'm the only one on Rallan's rant.
Fair point. And my listeners should take stock of that as well, which I hope they do. But yeah, so anyone who's interested in following Nick, I will have all your socials and links below. So whether you're listening to this on Spotify or watching on YouTube, all the links will be below. And yeah, Nick, I want to thank you for taking time out. I'm sure it's been exceptionally hectic and will continue to be for the next 3 or 4 days, but I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
You have my vote. You have my vote of confidence. And yeah, as I said, you were the politician to come on this podcast. I haven't had an Irish guy on since probably Owen Murphy, so it's good to get some of these faces back on.
Yeah, I'm delighted.
No worries.
Hopefully we'll be back when I'm elected.
Yeah, part 2 coming soon, please God.
Okay, great. That was excellent. Thanks very much.